our presentation is the contribution and response to the general subject or theme of the Congress, white places and black holes. In recent years, an impressive amount of scholarship has been undertaken on the unofficial art of the communist period, especially in regard to the neo-avant-garde art of the 1970s, but also increasingly evaluating the art of the 1980s. New research has gone into more detail about art under socialism, frequently demystifying the heroic narratives of the period, and above all presented a much more nuanced picture of the relationship between official and unofficial art, concentrating on points of communication and contact, blurred or grey zones, and overlaps between the two or three art worlds that coexisted during the era.
So, nevertheless, post-1968 neo-avant-garde art scenes across Eastern Europe shared certain characteristics in relation to the official art world and the strategies with which they negotiated terrains of power. Having to deal with very limited social, political, and artistic territories, artists under socialism developed various tactics, from turning inwards to body art and performances enacted for a closed circle of supporters, to turning outwards to explore the cosmological dimensions of art, with many Slovak artists in particular seeking their escape in outer space during a period which Rudolf Sikora tellingly described as one of unfree freedom.
Hungarian neo-avant-garde artists found refuge from political controls in the capital and a space for artistic experimentation in an abandoned chapel on the Lake Balaton. In Hungary, typically of the nation's drive for invention, they complicated the spectrum between official and unofficial art by inventing three categories, the notorious 3 T's of supported, tolerated, and forbidden art. The forbidden clearly stood for the unofficial, and the artists responded with the proclamation, "Be forbidden." As Miklos Haraszti explained, if we are forbidden, then we'll do whatever we want. This was the spirit of the Balaton-Boglar meetings, which also attracted a large number of the officials, although on duty and undercover.
In Yugoslavia, where moderate modernism had long been accepted into the official canon, the tensions arose when the neo-avant-garde rejected the tenets of high modernism and critiqued the established art system. The Slovenian group OHO, whose one American member gave rise to countless speculations about CIA infiltration, totally won over the progressive art world and then simply decided to abandon the constrictions of conventional society and go completely unofficial, in the sense of founding a rural commune and living in isolation just at the moment of their international success.
While it is tempting to idealize the situation of East European neo-avant-garde and their utopian quest for freedom of expression and action, their unconstrained creativity was born of necessity rather than choice. East European avant-garde artists were forced to create spaces in which they could live according to their beliefs and worldviews. Precarious conditions forced subjects to, in theorist Felix Guattari's term, to obtain for themselves a bare minimum of existential territories. In this sense, the liberated zones that East European artists created could be understood as such existential territories.
In contrast to the communist-era unofficial scene, which was defined in opposition to the ideological system of the socialist state, the unofficial art world of today's Eastern Europe exists in relation to the dominant national paradigm. As a result, it has diversified into the strata of traditional and new minorities, as well as the artistic misfits who are considered to be too international for the likings of the national order. While during communism, the restriction on travel contained the unofficial art scene firmly within closed borders, today's tendency of too much travel is also not really to the liking of the gatekeepers of national culture.
The unofficials of today are those whose presence in the art scene oscillates on the scale of toleration, reflected in their fragile existence in the institutional life of the art system, as well as the fleeting appearance in art historical and critical discourse. Their precarious and ephemeral status derives from the opposition to the dominant paradigm based upon a unitary and ethnocentric vision of the nation. Their position is therefore reduced to that of the minor, a concept explored by Deleuze and Guattari in their study of Kafka, another Central European cultural phenomenon.
Deleuze and Guattari's take on minor literature arises from their proposition that minor literature is actually that which, quote, a minority constructs within a major language by appropriating and deterritorializing its forms for their minor uses. Because of its peculiar condition and the cramped space, it necessitates an immediate connection to politics. Even when ostensibly dealing with individual concerns, it turns out that inevitably, quote, everything in them is political. Furthermore, they identify the transformative and affirmative potential of minor literature in the tendency for everything to take on a collective value. The collective assemblage of enunciation has the potential to create what they call active solidarity and offer the possibility to express another possible community and to forge the means for another consciousness and another sensibility. It is these minor positions that we would like to examine in the context of the unofficial of today's East European art.
The spectre of revival of nationalism and racism is the focus of Slovak artist and filmmaker Tomáš Ráfa's work, New Nationalism in the Heart of Europe. The assemblage of documentary footage of demonstrations and counter-demonstration across Eastern Europe records the rebirth of intolerance in recent years. A symbolic testing ground for a current state of social tolerance could be sampled in gay pride parades, which Ráfa regularly documents in his films, depicting the sense of standoffs between freedom-loving revelers for gay rights and extremists' attempt to disrupt the celebration with insults and violence, while the forces of law and order hover somewhere in between.
This is also the social context in which the National Museum in Poland organized the exhibition entitled Ars Homoerotica in summer 2010 during the short-lived directorship of Piotr Piotrowski, whose vision of a democratic national institution proved in the end to be too challenging for the inward-looking guardians of national culture. Although the show was criticized at the time for a bias towards male homosexuality, it was nevertheless a rare statement at the level of a national institution that made visible an underrepresented and overlooked minority and certainly reached out to unconventional museum audiences. However, the furore of the backlash against the show from the conservative mainstream illustrates the fact that the minor is always political.
Encountering social disadvantage and habitual molding into stereotypes on the one hand, one on the other, frequently identifying both with their home country and a wider transnational community, Roma artists have been systematically underrepresented both within the national canon and internationally. In an attempt to draw attention to this situation, a transnational Roma pavilion was initiated at Venice Biennial in 2007 with memorable first edition entitled Paradise Lost. Curator Tima Junghaus commented that in an ideal world, Roma artists would be able to exhibit in any of the European pavilions, but it is a fact that no artist of Roma origin has been presented at Venice Biennial throughout its 112-year history. Apart from challenging the homogeneous models of national identity, the 15 artists participating in Roma Pavilion not only demonstrated the implicit presence of the political in the representation of minorities, but also point to the affirmative power of collective in articulation of the minor.
So while the underrepresentation of the Roma in culture might be seen as paradigmatic of the unresolved position of historical minorities, the new minor brought about by the changes of post-socialism is to be found in new patterns of migration to the East European capitals. Settling down in geographies which for decades were rigidly framed by closed borders and communist neutralization of any difference, and then exposed to the corrosive power of globalization, to which an antidote was sought in the fixtures of the national paradigm, foreign art professionals found themselves involuntarily in the position of the minor. Their circumstances were complicated by the art world's preoccupation in the 1990s with the search for an essentialist East European identity, which, as non-natives, they were automatically considered as not able to provide. Despite, in many cases, persevering and spending a substantial part of their working lives devoted to the art scenes of the adopted geographies of Eastern Europe, foreign art professionals are today still barely present in the institutional structures of unreflectingly, nationally pure art worlds.
The exhibition we curated on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of 1989 in Kiszel Museum, which hosts the permanent art collection of the city of Budapest, is one of rare attempts to re-evaluate the political changes in the light of contribution of foreign artists to the local art scene. The research undertaken for revolutionary decadence and presented in the catalogue revealed intricate itineraries of the artists settling in Budapest, as well as significant void in official channels of artistic exchange in the first post-communist decade. It also traced the inventive strategies foreign artists devised to negotiate the self-oriented institutional terrain of the local art world. Although the artists were deliberately not coerced into referring directly to their status or position as foreigners in Hungary, in order not to reduce them to their essentialist foreign identity as opposed to the mono-national gaze, in other words, not to exoticize their differences, but to consider them as artists in their own right, nevertheless, the political dimension of the position of the minor was implicit.
Notably, the mistrust towards members of these new transnational migrant communities comes not just from the usual suspects guarding the fortresses of the nation, but also from post-colonial theorists who have the habit of referring disparagingly to a top-down elite or intellectual transnationalism, implying a lack of authenticity in comparison to subaltern migrants, when in reality the precariousness of their lifestyles should not be discounted. Furthermore, these artists, especially if they arrive from the West, are assumed to be rootless cosmopolitans without any enduring relationship to their chosen place. However, the future prospects of contemporary art probably lie with a new generation of rooted cosmopolitans, to borrow Ulrich Beck's term, who could be seen as offering an alternative and source of resistance to the ubiquitous national paradigm.
Interestingly, the minor position could also be recognized among those artists who, although belong to national majority and live and work from their countries of origins, because of the intensity of their international careers, are treated as rootless nationals. They are perceived as rootless in the national order because they don't comply with the power relations within national art structures and circumvent local hierarchies by taking part in events on the global art world. These images of the artist group Kasha Boys from Košice, who made art uniforms for the Slovak art world, and the uniform for the admiral is preserved from an ondak. The position is, however, not reserved only for international art celebrities, but also it is enough to settle in Berlin to create the effect or join international collaborations to gain the status of rootless in the eyes of the nation. At the same time, by acquiring the position of the minor, artists working internationally contribute to the destabilizing the mechanisms of the domination of the major.
Artists active on the international scene are engaged in a constant process of negotiation of the national and international contexts, ending up positioning themselves within minor or major streams, both locally and globally. To be accepted as major on the international scene often appears to involve giving up some of the singularities of their situation and assimilating completely to the values of the art market. The most productive and critical approach may well be to remain minor in regard to both the dominant national and the international paradigms. Such a position was characterized by Deleuze and Guattari as that in which the minor, quote, finds itself positively charged with the role and function of collective and even revolutionary enunciation.
But what happens when a minor could be identified within a major of the same national order? This is the current situation in Hungary, where the national paradigm does not only apply to mechanisms of the nation states, but the imposition of an ultra-conservative and nationalistic ideology on the cultural scene. A noticeable tendency is visible towards the obliteration of the autonomy of the art world by creating a constitutionally embedded super-institution responsible for national culture, restructuring funding bodies, and sidelining professional etiquette. This has led to emergence of a sharp divide between the critical art scene and a resurgent official culture.
Consequently, artists have tirelessly commented through their practice on the political developments in Hungary, by exposing nationalist tendencies, subverting national stereotypes, and deconstructing official propaganda. However, for some artists, the situation in cultural policy and the political everyday has deteriorated to such an extent that they realized that it was not enough to depict or reflect on the situation in their work. They left their canvases and studios behind, and equipped with cameras, taking care not to neglect the documentary appeal of what they were doing, decided to take direct action. Most prominently, the group Free Artists have undertaken a campaign to draw attention to the threat posed to artistic autonomy posed by the newly established Hungarian Academy of Arts, the MMA. You can see their founding meeting here. And we can talk more about that. But one of their earliest actions involved disrupting a public meeting of the MMA with shouted slogans, banners and flyers, protesting against the exclusionary and reprehensible character of the institution and its intended role in cultural life.
So in the middle is the Hungarian, one of the most prominent artists, Csaba Nemes, being hit by a folder and immediately also memorized in a drawing by another artist. So
it immediately became an iconic image, jumped from Facebook and Index to becoming a drawing.
The initiative that was most symbolic of the emergence of the category of new unofficial in Hungarian artistic life was the unprecedented decision by a diverse group of art professionals to occupy the Ludwig Museum. The movement of the Ludwig Stairs brought together artists, curators, critics, as well as gallerists and collectors of contemporary art to occupy the entrance of the space of the museum for a period of 12 days in May 2013 to demand autonomy, transparency, and accountability. Through their horizontal organization, Occupy-style techniques of protest, as well as creative content they brought to the occupation through discussions, lectures, workshops, and concerts, these unlikely activists suggested a radically different model of artistic culture to that proposed by official cultural policy. Further confirmation of their minor status, however, was the sinking realization that the maximum number of art professionals that could be mobilized to defend the autonomy of contemporary art in Hungary is 60.
Recognition of the existence of the unofficial within contemporary East European art mirrors the emergence of a political critique of both society and the functioning of the art world in the wake of the era of transition. The precariousness of both old and new minorities within the institutional order of the national paradigm and their ephemeral presence within a cultural terrain dominated by the struggle between an exclusionary nationalist ideology and the distorted internationalism of the global market are unavoidable characteristics of the position of the minor. Making a virtue out of necessity, the unofficial art of today has, much like the new avant-garde of the socialist era, begun to carve out existential territories from which to operate, destabilizing dominant systems and rediscovering the affirmative power of the minor. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you also showing the link to your project or like to your group, because I forgot to tell it that translocal is your kind of trademark maybe already. And thank you. And I hope we have some questions from audience. I know it's, yeah, okay. There's...
I don't have the actual information from Budapest. So how all this protest in Ludwig Museum finished? I mean, what's going on now there in Ludwig Museum, Budapest?
So the occupation went on, I think, for 12 days, and after when they left, the next day, the ministry announced the appointment of the new director Julia Fabiani, who is now the director, and in the wake of that, about half of the staff, the curators, have found alternative sources of employment. Or unemployed.
But do you know anything about program?
I mean, Obviously museums work with a program which is 1 or 2 years planned in advance, but I know that they have to fill some gaps because certain projects are not being realized as a result.
Hello, I'm Susan Snodgrass, and a co-editor for Art Margins Online, and I just wanted to say that we just posted a whole project connected to what they're talking about this conservative nationalistic backlash, in which actually Maja and Reuben interview the free artists. So anyway, it just to give you some more background to the questions that you were asking them. So anyway, I just encourage you to look at it.
So this is a abstract sort of a question, but I'm interested in potential publics or readers for this kind of intervention, and I suppose this also applies to Elena's talk as well. But both of you have a very interesting theoretical point there about minor literature, which could easily be applied in other situations. So when I think of potential readers, potential publics, or potential disciplines, I think if this were, say, an art history conference, there would be venues for that kind of contribution, which could find their way into histories, ideally. If this were a theory conference, like a post-colonial theory conference, I could imagine in the best of all possible worlds, this kind of contribution could go into third text, for example, as an interesting critique of a certain reading of minor literature, which would be interesting against certain post-colonial positions. But in the context of art criticism, I'm not sure how, in the best of all possible worlds, this kind of approach would move through the world. Where would it go? Where would your readers be? What would be the best possible venue for it, for a message like this?
Maybe just to say that although one context here is the fact it's the Art Critics Congress. The other, as Maja also referred to at the beginning, it's also a response to the theme that was set up by the organisers of white places and black holes, and this whole emerging discourse about, sorry to use the word emerging, but this whole discourse of around East European art. And I mean, really this kind of discussion comes out of our work and our understanding of East European art, and how just by trying to practice that, trying to study that, this is very much part of the debate that is going on at the moment around these issues. I mean, and, in a way, it's a what our paper today fits quite well with the discussion on the first day. It's also Piotr Petrovsky, who you also mentioned, kind of brought up these various issues, and
we just wanted to point out to this sideline aspect of East European art studies, where so many things, even through many presentations, we always hear about the national representations, and we wanted to point out to the much more complex picture. We talked about the unofficial of the socialist era, and we talked about guitarist existential territories concept, which comes from his Three Ecologies book and so on, which is very appropriate also today, where artists are carving their territories in the new global context. But the thing we decided to use minor is because, one, it is related to the Central European phenomenon of Kafka and the study of Kafka. And the other is because thinking simply in terms of official, unofficial, or terms of national or non-national is not necessarily going to get us further. So in this way, we thought that this is quite appropriate for this, just to bring these various different unofficials together by thinking of them in terms of the minor understanding that they are political, that there is a potential to collectivity in all these aspects and all these unofficials of East European today. And also, thirdly, to what is the third?
I mean, I mean, possibly the third, also to point out that these exclusions that happen are not just happening towards East European art from the International Centre, but they can also operate within within East European local.
It is the avoidance of the concept of peripheries and the centre, which we think is much bigger problem than talking about the minor within the major.
I have a microphone, but I have to say that part of a question I wanted to ask has just been answered, because my question is whether the new unofficial is tied exclusively to Eastern Europe. And I have serious doubts about that. And would like to ask you how you feel about it.
Because we are researchers in the art of the socialist era, we come to the unofficial all the time, and it is a very, very powerful concept because of these liberated zones that the artists were forced to create for themselves in the time of socialism, and it created such excellent conditions for the art of the time. The art thrived; they were free to create in these terrible conditions they lived in, and I think that is an excellent inheritance from the socialist art for today's contemporary artists. Many artists today use that legacy in their own practice and create new unofficial associations and new unofficial territories through which they work and try to navigate the contemporary art and the global art market and the global art system and so on and so on. The unofficial is a problem, but it's also something that is very present in the psyche of today. And if you come from contemporary Hungary, this is the only thing we're talking about now, because the major institutions have been closed, have been changed. The Kunsthalle doesn't exist anymore for contemporary art. The Ludwig Museum has just been practically closed for contemporary art in the next 5 years at least. The smaller institutions did not exist. We have private galleries or we have private apartments. Unofficial gatherings, which were part of the socialism, are back again in Hungary at the moment. So this is something that we came from our own experience of living and working there, and this idea of the Hungarians always complicated the system. They had the three categories. They never had only official and unofficial. They always had the tolerated as well. And people are balancing between these categories, but they found themselves getting together, most unlikely people of private galleries, of collectors, of artists, progressive artists, and critics all together, trying to try to do something about the contemporary situation. And that, most of all, that situation in Hungary today prompts us to talk about the official and unofficial.
Let me go. Wait. I thought it was interesting you used the word minor. You coined that term yourselves? Minor versus...
We were borrowing or referring to the concept of the minor used by Deleuze and Guattari in their essay on minor literature. So we were applying this term used in theoretical and kind of literature studies, trying to see whether it resonates with the situation in the visual arts as well.
Because I think it's interesting, you can also, the minor as in mining and going deeper. And just could you speak briefly to professionalism in Eastern Europe or Hungary and specifically in the context of what you're talking about and what that means in the sense of this profession of the arts in Hungary seems to be at risk considering the local developments? You know, professionalism versus, you know, more a creative approach, you know, of the outsider in a sense.
I think in this context, when we're talking about art professionals, that would also include that would somehow be a way of describing people who are genuinely interested in art and contemporary art, who are part of the art scene. So that's
not just interested, but make a career out of it, that can make a living out of it. And it seems like that's at risk now in Hungary, but also that needs to be looked at in terms of the whole development and the structure of these art institutions in Eastern Europe and what it means to not have them anymore. I mean, this could be a new cycle which is forcing, you know, people to go and find other resources, to go inward more, not look outside as much. I mean, there could be some positive results, perhaps, of of these new developments.
At the end, perhaps, I would like to concentrate on one side, perhaps matter. as observing today conference, that I think that in this part of Europe, the national idea is the most poisoning idea. And any art history, any art critic, if we want to extract Ukrainian art, Slovak art, Czechish art, and so on, then always we receive an artificial image, because everything in this part is in relation, it is interrelated. And I like very much your lecture, and congratulations. Thank you.